What you're about to hear started as a family argument and ended as the kind of revenge no one in that house ever forgot.
My name is Simone King. I am 38 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have been building an empire in silence. My family, the prestigious Kings of Atlanta, wrote me off as a failure after I refused to play their games. They thought I was broken. They thought I was poor. Last Thanksgiving, I came home for the first time in 5 years. My father, Marcus King, stood at the head of the table and announced he was selling the family business. He looked right at me and said, "Simone, you get nothing." My siblings cheered. I just smiled and took a sip of my wine. That night, I authorized my legal team to finalize the acquisition. They thought they were selling to a stranger. They had no idea they were selling to me. Before I tell you what happened next in that silent room, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to watch people celebrate your downfall, not knowing you were 10 steps ahead. The moment I stepped out of the rideshare and onto the long, curving driveway of the King family mansion, the air felt thick. This was Atlanta, this was my history, and this was the place I had run from. I walked up the marble steps, my simple black heels clicking. This house was a fortress of my father's ego, and I was the ghost returning to the feast. The front door was already open. I stepped inside. The whole family was already in the grand foyer, champagne flutes in hand. My father Marcus just nodded at me from across the room. My brother Jamal did not even look up, but Chad did. My brother-in-law Chad Scott detached himself from the group and moved to intercept me. Chad is a man who married into our family and immediately decided he was more of a king than I ever was. He lives off my sister's allowance, calls himself a consultant, and seems to believe his white skin gives him a special pass in my father's eyes. Sadly, he is right. He blocked my path, his smile all teeth. "Simone, my God." He looked past me toward the driveway. "You are not still driving that ancient Lexus, are you, seriously?" He laughed, a high, thin sound. "Keisha and I just put our deposit down on the new Rivian R1S, electric, top of the line. You know you have to upgrade, see me. Elevate." He tapped his temple as if sharing a secret. "Oh, and how is that little analyst job up in New York, still crunching numbers in that tiny cubicle for peanuts?" My little sister Keisha glided up next to him, sliding her arm through his. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than most people's rent, and she made sure I knew it. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple, tailored black suit. "Honey," she said to Chad, her voice dripping with fake pity, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Be nice. She is a minimalist now." Keisha then turned her full attention to me, her smile poisonous. "Honestly, Chad, I think she is just still not over the Oakwood embarrassment. She has to live a quiet life. It is the only way she can cope, you know, after failing so publicly." There it was. The Oakwood embarrassment. The words echoed in the high-ceilinged room. The very thing they had pinned on me. The very reason I was here. I said nothing. I just held Keisha's gaze. Her smile faltered for a second, confused by my silence. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to fight. She did not expect this calm. Chad's smile also tightened. He was not used to being ignored. "Well," he slurred, "do not just stand there. Go find a seat. Try not to break anything." They turned laughing and walked back to the group. I took a deep breath. The first attack was over. The game had begun. I let their words hang in the air like a bad smell. Keisha and Chad stood there smug and proud, waiting for me to break, waiting for the tears or the angry protests. I gave them neither. I simply held my head high, my expression calm, and looked past them toward the grand dining room as if they were two buzzing insects I could not be bothered to swat. I could see the flash of confusion in Keisha's eyes. My calm was not part of their script. My refusal to be the victim was more infuriating to them than any angry outburst could ever be. My silence was a weapon. And that weapon, that quiet strength, was something my brother Jamal could not stand. He strode over, breaking away from his conversation with my father. Jamal, the golden boy, the crown prince, who had been handed the title of chief operating officer, while I, with twice his qualifications, had been offered an internship. He was the one who truly ran the Oakwood project into the ground, but history, as written by my father, had erased his incompetence. He stopped right in front of me, purposefully invading my personal space. He was a big man, and he always used his size to intimidate. "Sit down, Simone," he commanded, his voice a low growl. I just looked at him. "I said sit down," he repeated, louder this time. He glanced around the room, which had grown quiet. "You have been here for less than 2 minutes, and you are already making a scene." "I have not said a single word," I stated, my voice even. "You do not have to," he sneered. "It is that look on your face, that I'm better than all of you look. You walk in here late, dressed like you are going to a funeral, and you just stand there." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "Listen to me. Dad is in a good mood tonight. He is happy. We are celebrating. He is about to make a very important announcement." He paused, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Do not ruin it. Do not you dare ruin this for him." He continued, his voice dripping with condescension, as if speaking to a child. "We are all trying to have a nice, normal Thanksgiving. For once. A day without your protests, your judgments, your drama. Can you do that? Can you just be normal for one night?" He scoffed, as if the idea itself was ridiculous. "Just go sit in the corner. Be quiet. Try not to be the family's laughingstock for just one day, Simone. Is that really so much to ask?" He did not wait for an answer. He just shook his head in complete disgust, adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt, and turned his back on me, walking away as if he had just handled a disobedient dog. I stood there. The laughingstock, the drama, the problem. He had no idea. The Oakwood embarrassment. That is their favorite story. The one they have polished over the last decade, the one they use to define me, the one they use to justify their cruelty. They say it so often, I think they have actually started to believe their own lies. But I remember the truth. I remember every single detail. 10 years ago, I was 28 years old, and I was the brightest mind at King Development. But I was also my father's daughter, and in his eyes that meant I was not his son. I developed the Oakwood project from scratch. It was my baby. It was not just another luxury high-rise. It was a sustainable multi-use community complex designed to revitalize the very neighborhood our family came from. It had green spaces, affordable housing, and incubators for local Black-owned businesses. It was more than a project. It was a legacy. I spent 6 months on the proposal. I brought it to the board. I presented it to my father, Marcus. And he laughed. He did not just smile or disagree. He leaned back in his leather chair in front of the entire executive team, and he laughed right in my face. He called it naive. He called it a little girl's fantasy. And then, in the ultimate act of public humiliation, he stood up, put his arm around Jamal, and announced, "My son will take it from here. Jamal will show you how to turn this little school project into actual money." And Jamal did what Jamal always does. He took my vision and he butchered it. He scrapped the green spaces. He fired the local architects. He turned Oakwood into a cheap, soulless, cookie-cutter condominium complex. He cut corners on materials, he bypassed safety inspections, and he pocketed the difference. He gutted it from the inside out. It did not just fail, it collapsed. Literally. A structural wall failed during a heavy rainstorm. The entire site was condemned. King Development lost $20 million, and our family name was dragged through the mud all over the Atlanta news. And who did my father blame? Who stood in front of the press and took the fall? Not Jamal, his golden boy. No, he blamed me. Marcus King told the world that the entire catastrophe was due to my flawed initial design. He was the one who first called me the Oakwood embarrassment. He made me the laughingstock of the entire city. That was the day I stopped being his daughter. That was the day I walked away from Atlanta. And that was the day I started planning in meticulous detail how I would one day return. I stood there for a long moment, letting Jamal's insult hang in the air. I watched him retreat to my father's side, and they clapped each other on the back, a private joke shared between the two men who had ruined everything. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me waiting for the laughingstock to finally break. I calmly walked past them, ignoring their smug looks, and took the empty seat at the far end of the long, polished mahogany table as far away from my father as possible. I placed my small clutch on the floor beside me. The dinner was, as always, a lavish affair. A 20-pound turkey glistened in the center, surrounded by mountains of roasted vegetables, buttery mashed potatoes, and pecan pies. It was a performance of wealth, a feast designed to show the world how blessed the King family was. The conversation was loud, but it was hollow. Keisha and Chad were bragging about their upcoming ski trip to Aspen. Jamal was loudly explaining a stock market win he had clearly just read about. My father Marcus sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne observing his court. And then it happened. The sound that always signaled the beginning of the end. Clink, clink, clink. My father Marcus King tapped his crystal wineglass with a silver spoon. The room, which had been buzzing with fake laughter and boasts, fell into an immediate heavy silence. Every eye snapped to him. This was his stage, and we were his unwilling audience. He rose from his chair. He was a tall man, still imposing at 65. He wore an impeccably tailored suit even at his own Thanksgiving dinner. He commanded the room. He owned it. He owned everyone in it, except me. Family! His voice boomed rich and deep, echoing in the high-ceilinged dining room. He raised his glass. We are gathered here today, as we are every year, to give thanks. He smiled, but it never reached his cold, assessing eyes. I look around this table and I see a legacy. He looked at Jamal, who sat up straighter. I see the future of what my father, your grandfather, built from the red clay of Atlanta. He looked at Keisha. I see the beauty and the grace that makes the King name respected. He did not look at me. King Development, he continued, is more than a company. It is the blood, sweat, and tears of our line. I have spent my entire life honoring what my father started, and I have built it into an empire. He paused, taking a deliberate sip of his wine, letting the tension build. He was a master showman. But times change. A legacy is a heavy burden, and I am tired. Immediately, Keisha and Jamal began their performance. Oh, Daddy, no. Keisha cooed, her hand flying to her chest. You are the strongest man we know. He is right, Dad, Jamal added. You are not old. You are in your prime. Marcus raised a single powerful hand. Quiet. They went silent instantly, like trained dogs. He looked around the table, his gaze unreadable. Every empire must evolve. Every king must know when to look to the next chapter to secure the future. Another pause. The silence was so thick I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. And so, he said, his voice dropping, after months of careful consideration, I have made a final executive decision. He locked his eyes not on his favored children but directly on me across the A. I have decided to sell the company. The air in the room crackled. Keisha and Jamal, the two loyal actors, immediately leaped into their roles. Sell! Jamal half shouted, standing up from his chair. Dad, what are you talking about? Sell King Development! Keisha put her hand to her throat, her eyes wide with what she must have thought passed for concern. Oh my God, Daddy, no, you cannot. It is Granddad's legacy. You are not sick, are you? I watched them. It was a pathetic, disgusting show. I could see the ghost of a smile on Jamal's face even as he pretended to be shocked. They knew. Of course they knew. My father had rehearsed this entire evening with them. This whole dinner was a stage, a courtroom, and I had been summoned for my sentencing. Marcus raised his hand. Enough. Sit down, Jamal. The fake protests died instantly. This is not a tragedy, my father continued, his voice smoothing out. This is a victory. This is the celebration of a lifetime of work. He smiled a genuine proud smile, but it was directed only at his two favored children. I am rewarding loyalty, he announced to the room. I am rewarding the two people who stood by my side, who honored this family, who worked day in and day out to protect our name. I almost laughed out loud. Loyalty. He called it loyalty. I called it complicity. The two people who had helped him run the company into the ground, who had spent every dollar he gave them, who had covered for each other's incompetence for a decade. Jamal, Keisha, my father beamed at them. You have been my loyal successors. You are the future of this family. Therefore, the entire proceeds of this sale will be split 50-50 between the two of you. For a second, the room was silent. And then the real celebration began. Keisha let out a genuine shriek this time. Oh, Daddy! Thank you, thank you! Jamal was more composed, but his eyes were lit up with a greedy fire. Dad, that is incredible. Thank you. We will not let you down. My father nodded, basking in their adoration. He let the applause from Chad and the other relatives wash over him. He was the benevolent king bestowing his riches. And then his head turned, slowly, deliberately. His gaze traveled the entire 20-foot length of the table, past the glistening turkey, past the crystal wine glasses, and it landed on me. The smile was gone. His face hardened, transforming into the cold granite mask of the man who had exiled me 10 years ago. The room went quiet again, sensing the shift. This was it, the main event. Simone, he said. My name sounded like a curse on his tongue. He had barely looked at me all night, but now for this, he gave me his full, undivided attention. You, he said, chose your own path. 10 years ago, you decided you were smarter than this family. You decided you were better. You spat on your grandfather's legacy. You walked away from your father. You walked away from your blood. His voice dropped, becoming even colder, each word a perfectly aimed stone. You turned your back on this family. And now this family turns its back on you. In this transaction. In this new future. In this moment of celebration. He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing every single person in that room to look at me, the outcast. You get nothing. You get nothing. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My father's pronouncement. The silence in the room stretched for 1, 2, 3 seconds. It was a suffocating, terrible silence. And then it was shattered. Not by quiet applause, but by a sound that I can only describe as a shriek of pure, unfiltered greed. Oh my God, Daddy! Keisha launched herself from her chair and ran to my father, throwing her arms around his neck. She was crying, actual tears of joy streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Oh, Daddy, I love you. I love you so much. It is the right decision. It is such a fair decision. Jamal was on his feet too, his face flushed with victory. He did not run, but he clapped my father hard on the back, a wide, triumphant grin splitting his face. Dad, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you have no idea what this means. Thank you. Thank you. He raised his glass to the room, to his sister, a conquering hero. Then Chad, my slimy brother-in-law, started to clap. It was not a normal applause, it was a slow, deliberate, mocking clap, and it was aimed directly at me. Absolutely fair. He added, his voice slick with false sincerity, as he walked over to join the huddle around my father. He looked over Keisha's shoulder, his eyes finding mine across the long table. You simply cannot give a family legacy to someone who tried to destroy it, he said, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. He was not talking to my father, he was talking to me. He was performing for the crowd, playing the part of the loyal son-in-law. And then he did it. He winked, a slow, condescending, I win you lose wink. That was the moment. The moment all the pieces of their pathetic, cruel little play clicked into place. They were not just celebrating their newfound wealth. They were celebrating my public execution, They were dancing on the grave they had spent the last 10 years digging for me. They had gathered me here in my childhood home on a day meant for gratitude to put a final humiliating stamp on my failure. I watched them, Keisha weeping with joy, Jamal beaming with pride, Chad smirking with superiority, and my father, Marcus King, soaking in their adoration like a starved man finding a feast. They looked like vultures picking apart a carcass. And I did not say a word, I just smiled. A small, private, almost imperceptible smile. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. It was a full-bodied Cabernet. It tasted like victory. They thought the show was over. They thought they had won. But I knew the truth. The real show was just about to begin. The noise of their celebration was deafening. Keisha was still clinging to my father, and Jamal was pouring another round of champagne, his toast echoing through the room. "To the future!" he bellowed. "To the new kings!" Chad caught my eye again and raised his glass, his smirk wider than ever. Every single person in that room, from my father down to the catering staff, was waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the laughingstock to burst into tears. They were waiting for me to scream, to protest, to beg for scraps from the table. They were waiting for the broken 28-year-old girl I used to be. But I just sat there. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not even flinch. Instead, I let that small, private smile grow. It was not a happy smile. It was not a sad smile. It was the smile of a chess player who has just seen the checkmate 5 moves away. I slowly, deliberately picked up my heavy cloth napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. I set my wineglass down on the polished mahogany table. The sound was a soft, definitive click. That tiny sound cut through the celebration like a knife. The laughter and cheering in the room tapered off like a radio dial being slowly turned down. My father, still being embraced by a sniffling Keisha, looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Why was I not crying? Why was I not begging? I met his gaze. I held it. "An interesting decision, Dad," I said. My voice was calm. It was clear. It was crisp. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of an executive. It carried across the entire room. The last bits of chatter died instantly. The silence was now absolute. Keisha let go of my father, her tear-stained, joyful face, now a mask of pure, baffled confusion. Jamal froze, the champagne bottle hovering halfway to a glass. Even Chad's smirk faltered. "What?" my father said, his voice no longer celebratory but wary. "What did you just say?" I said. I repeated, leaning forward just slightly, my eyes never leaving his. "That it is an interesting decision, a fascinating business move." I let the words hang in the air. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. This was not in their script. This was not the part where the villain monologues and the victim weeps. I was not following the rules. I smiled a little wider this time, showing just a hint of teeth. "It makes me curious. I am intrigued." I looked at my father, the great, powerful Marcus King, who had just publicly disinherited me. "I am just wondering," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "Who is the buyer?" My question, "Who is the buyer?" echoed in the silent room. My father's face, which had been frozen in confusion, slowly began to change. He processed my calm tone, my smile, my complete lack of tears, and he made a fatal mistake. He misinterpreted my poise for pathetic desperation. He thought I was trying to find some tiny crack, some way to stay in the conversation. He decided in his arrogance to humor me one last time, to show me just how completely I had lost, and how grand his victory was. He let out a short, pitying laugh. "Who is the buyer?" he repeated, as if I was a child asking about his complex work. "You think you would know them? You think that little analyst job of yours in New York puts you in these kinds of circles?" He was loving this. He puffed out his chest, his voice swelling with pride, booming for the entire family to hear. He was not just answering me. He was putting the final jewel in his own crown. They are a very serious fund, Simone, a private equity powerhouse. They are based in New York, actually, but they are in a league you could not possibly understand. They are extremely powerful and extremely discreet. He leaned forward, as if sharing a grand secret with the whole table, savoring the moment. They are called Everest Holdings. He let the name hang in the air, a name he thought sounded powerful and untouchable. And they are paying, he said, his voice dropping to a low, theatrical rumble designed to inspire awe. A number you cannot even comprehend. $86 million. $86 million. The number landed on the table like a bomb. Keisha gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jamal's eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his head. Chad just whistled low and long. My father beamed, soaking it all in. He had his audience back. He had won. And I started to laugh. It was not a quiet smile this time. It was not a giggle. It was a real, deep, uncontrollable laugh. It started in my stomach and just exploded out of me. I could not stop it. I put my head back, and I laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings and the polished wood. The celebration in the room died instantly, but this time it was replaced with a stunned, horrified silence. They were all staring at me. They thought I had finally snapped. They thought the laughingstock had officially become hysterical. My father's face turned a dark, angry shade of red. "What?" he snapped, his voice sharp. "What is so funny? What is so funny about $86 million, Simone? Have you finally lost your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to control myself. I wiped a single tear of laughter from the corner of my eye. I placed my hands flat on the table, centering myself. I looked up. I looked right into the eyes of my father, the king on his throne. "Everest Holdings," I said, my voice finally steady, but still vibrating with amusement. "Dad," I said, and I smiled, a full, bright, genuine smile. "I am Everest Holdings." The room went silent. The silence in that room was no longer just quiet. It was a physical thing. It was a heavy, weighted blanket pressing down on all of us. I could hear the antique clock on the mantel ticking, tick-tock. Each sound was like a hammer blow. Keisha's mouth was hanging open, a perfectly round O of disbelief. Jamal was completely frozen, his arm still raised, the champagne bottle still hovering. Chad's smug wink was gone, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed confusion. But all eyes were on my father, Marcus. He was staring at me. His face, which had been red with anger moments before, was now a strange, mottled, ashy gray. He seemed to be searching my face, looking for the lie, looking for the hysterical, broken girl he had exiled. He found instead a CEO. He was the first one to break, not with a question, but with a roar. "Nonsense!" he bellowed. The word exploded from him so loud it made Keisha jump. "Nonsense!" he repeated, slamming his fist down on the mahogany table. The crystal glasses and silver forks jumped. "You are lying." He pointed a thick, trembling finger at me from across the table. "You sit there in my house on this day, and you lie to my face. You think this is a joke?" He was regaining his confidence, his anger fueling him. "I have been in negotiations for 6 months. I know who I am dealing with. I have spoken to their vice president. I have had meetings with him. I know the man. His name is Michael Harrison. Michael Harrison." He said the name like it was a trump card. He looked around at the family as if to say, "See, I have proof." He is a serious man, a professional, a veteran of the industry. And then he delivered the line he thought would end the argument. The line he thought proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was a liar. "He is a white man, a 50-year-old white man." He stood there panting, slightly triumphant. He thought he had caught me. He thought he had exposed my desperate, childish bluff. I did not flinch. I did not even look surprised. I simply nodded, as if he had just confirmed a minor detail. Exactly, Dad, I said. My voice was still calm, but now it cut through the room like ice. Michael Harrison, he is wonderful, an excellent VP of acquisitions. He is 61, not 50, but you were close. His golf game is terrible, but his negotiation skills are first rate. My father's face faltered. What? What are you talking about? I am talking about Michael, I said. I hired him. I hired him 3 years ago from a rival firm. I gave him that title. I gave him that generous bonus structure. I leaned forward, and I made sure every person at that table could hear my next words. I hired Michael for this specific deal because I knew Dad. I knew you would never ever take a meeting seriously with a 38-year-old black woman, even if she was your own daughter. You would never respect me. You would never believe I could build an empire. I looked around the table at Jamal, at Chad. You only trust the Michaels of the world. You only respect the men who look just like the men you have always done business with. So I gave you a Michael. My father's face was a mask of utter disbelief, but his arrogance was a fortress. He was still fighting. You are lying, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous now. You are insane. You are a delusional, pathetic girl sitting here spinning fantasies. You hired him. He laughed, but the sound was brittle and sharp. You could not afford his dry cleaning. Jamal found his voice joining the attack. She's just trying to save face, Dad. She's making it all up. She's pathetic. This is just sad. Chad nodded, his smirk returning. It is really sad to watch Simone. Just give it up. I looked at them. The three of them united in their delusion, still so sure of their world, still so sure I was the failure they had created. You are right, Dad, I said, my voice soft. You should not just take my word for it. I am, after all, the Oakwood embarrassment. You need proof. I reached into my small, simple black clutch bag. I pulled out my phone. It was the latest model, sleek and black, but they did not notice that. They were too busy watching me like three hawks waiting for a mouse to twitch. What are you doing now? Marcus sneered. Are you going to Google Everest Holdings to show us the website? Are you going to call your little analyst friends to back you up? Something like that, I replied. I unlocked the screen. I went to my favorites. I tapped the name at the very top. The contact did not read Michael. It simply read EH Ops. And I did not just call. I made a video call. The room was silent. As the phone began to ring, the sound echoing unnaturally. 1 ring. 2 rings. I placed the phone flat on the polished table in the center, right next to my untouched plate of food. I angled the screen so everyone, especially my father, could see it. And on the 3rd ring, the call connected. The screen lit up. And the face that appeared was the exact man my father had described. Michael Harrison. He was older, distinguished, with silver hair, sitting in what looked like a beautiful wood-paneled study, a fireplace roaring behind him. He looked powerful. He looked professional. He looked, as my father had so triumphantly pointed out, very white. My father actually gasped. That is him, he yelled, pointing. That is Michael Harrison. That is the man. Michael on the screen looked slightly confused, taking in the chaotic scene of a family dinner table. He started to speak. Simone, I thought we... I cut him off, my voice clear and strong. Pardon the interruption, Michael, I said. I know you are with your family for the holiday. I just needed you to confirm a few details for my family. The moment I used that tone, Michael Harrison's entire demeanor shifted. The casual confusion vanished. His back straightened. He snapped into the role of an employee speaking to their superior. He looked directly into the camera. Of course, Madam CEO, he said. His voice was crisp, respectful, and carried perfectly from the phone's speaker. No intrusion at all. Is everything proceeding as planned? Are the final acquisition documents ready for your signature, Madam CEO? The 2 words hit the room like a physical blow. There was a sudden, sharp, shattering sound. I turned my head. Keisha. Her hand was frozen in the air, but the crystal wine glass she had been holding was gone. It had slipped from her completely numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor, exploding in a spray of dark red wine and 1,000 glittering fragments. Keisha! Chad yelled, jumping back as the wine spattered his pants. But Keisha did not move. She did not even look at the broken glass or the spreading stain. She was staring at my phone, her face paper white, her mouth hanging open. CEO, she whispered, her voice a tiny, trembling, broken sound. He called her. CEO. The sound of the breaking glass was the only thing that moved. For a full 10 seconds, nobody else did. Keisha just stared at the red wine spreading like blood across the floorboards. Chad was dabbing at his pants, his face pale. My father Marcus was frozen. His eyes locked on Michael's face on the phone screen, his entire world visibly short-circuiting. But then I saw it. The first one to move was Jamal. His head had been down, staring at the table as if in a daze. Now his head slowly came up. His eyes, which had been wide with shock, began to narrow. I could see the primitive, greedy gears grinding in his head. He was not processing the betrayal. He was not processing the lie. He was processing the number. $86 million. A slow, strange, oily smile began to spread across his face. Wait a minute, he said, his voice quiet at first, then growing with excitement. He looked past my father. He looked past Keisha. He looked right at me, and his smile became a huge, idiotic grin. Wait just one damn minute, he boomed, and he started to laugh. It was a nervous, high-pitched laugh. CEO Simone, you are the CEO. He shook his head as if I had just pulled off the most amazing prank. So, all that, he waved his hand around the room. All that you get nothing stuff. That was just part of the deal. He was not asking. He was telling himself. The money, he suddenly yelled, his eyes lighting up. The 86 million. It is still here. It is with you. He clapped his hands together, a single loud smack that made Keisha jump. Simone, you brilliant thing, you magnificent, you kept it in the family. He walked around the table, his energy completely changed from shock to celebration. Oh, this is rich. This is better. We do not have to sell to some stranger. We are selling to you. It is all our money. Keisha finally broke her trance. She looked up from the broken glass, her mind slower than Jamal's, finally catching up to his flawed logic. Money, she whispered. The 86 million. Yes, Jamal shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. He is paying her, which means we get paid. We are still rich. Keisha's face transformed. The pale shock was washed away by a hot, greedy flush of relief. Oh my God, she breathed. Oh my God, Jamal, you are right. 86 million. She turned to me, her eyes just as demanding as they had been 10 minutes ago, but now filled with a desperate new hope. So, she said, her voice shaky but regaining its usual entitlement. You are the CEO. You are the buyer. Fine. Great. When do we get our checks? When do Jamal and I get our cut? Cut the check, Simone. Let's get this done. I watched them. My brother and sister, their faces lit up with a grotesque, desperate greed. They had gone from shock to disbelief to pure, unadulterated avarice in the span of 30 seconds. They were already spending the $86 million in their heads. They were dividing up my life's work, a company they did not even understand, like two spoiled children fighting over a birthday cake. They did not care that I was the CEO. They did not care about the lie. They only cared about the money. They were so lost in their fantasy, they did not notice that one person in their group was not celebrating. Chad. My brother-in-law, Chad Scott, was not smiling. He was not demanding his cut. He was standing behind Keisha, his face pale, his eyes narrowed, and he was staring at me. He was the only one in the room besides me who was actually thinking. Hold on, Chad said. his voice cutting through Keisha's excited babbling about a new boat. "What is it, honey?" Keisha snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "We are talking—" "No," Chad said, shaking his head slowly. He never took his eyes off me. "I do not get it. I do not get it." He pushed past Keisha and took a step toward the table. "You," he said, pointing at me. "You are a CEO." He said the word like it was poison. "You are the girl who ran the Oakwood project into a $20 million lawsuit. You are the one who ran off to New York. You are an analyst." "An analyst," he spat. "We all know it. You sit in a cubicle and you crunch numbers for some faceless bank." He was pacing now, his mind spinning, trying to make the pieces fit his worldview. "How does an analyst just get a fund like Everest Holdings? Where does $86 million come from? It does not just happen." He looked at my father. "Marcus, she is lying. This is a trick." I let him spin. I let him work himself up, let him voice every single condescending thought they had ever had about me. He was clinging to the narrative they had all built, the narrative of Simone the failure. Because if that narrative was wrong, then their entire world, their entire sense of superiority was built on a lie. When he finally stopped panting in his frustration, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down. "First, Chad," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the room. "I need you to stop using that word." "What word?" he sneered. "Lying. Analyst," I said. "I am not an analyst. I do not crunch numbers in a cubicle. I am not the person you all so desperately needed me to be." He stared at me blankly. "Then what are you?" "I am an investor," I said. "An investor," he scoffed. "In what stocks, crypto?" "No," I replied, and I let a very cold, very small smile touch my lips. "I am an investor with a very specific, very niche specialty." I leaned forward, my voice dropping so they all had to lean in to hear me. "My specialty is finding, acquiring, and restructuring dying family-owned real estate companies, companies that are rotting from the inside out, companies being destroyed by the incompetence and the greed of the very children who were supposed to be their heirs." I held his gaze. "Companies, just like yours." Chad's words hung in the air. "Companies, just like yours." And I let him and all of them drown in the implication of that statement. I saw the flash of true animal fear in my brother-in-law's eyes. I saw my father clench the arm of his chair, his knuckles white. I saw Jamal and Keisha still stuck on the 86 million, their faces blank, not yet understanding the true nature of the game they were in. They thought I was an analyst. They thought I was a failure. They thought I had been hiding in New York, licking my wounds, living a small, pathetic life. They needed to believe that because the alternative was too terrifying for them to comprehend. The alternative meant that while they were laughing, while they were spending, while they were celebrating my downfall, I was building. When I left Atlanta 10 years ago, I did not just leave. I was driven out. I was exiled. Marcus and Jamal did not just let me go. They pushed me out, slammed the door, and set fire to the bridge. They made sure I knew I was no longer a king. They were right. I was not. I landed at LaGuardia with one suitcase, a laptop, and $10,000 to my name. I walked out into the cold New York air, and I felt free. The name King was not a crown. It was a cage, and I had just been let out of it. That first night in a tiny, sterile hotel room in Midtown, I made a decision. I would never again be defined by my father's name. I would not be Simone King, the Oakwood embarrassment. I opened my laptop and I started a new life. I took the one thing of value they had not been able to burn or steal. I took my mother's maiden name, the name of the strong, brilliant woman my father had slowly crushed with his ego. S.K. Vaughn. S.K. Vaughn was born that night. Simone King died in that Atlanta boardroom, laughed out of existence by her own father. S.K. Vaughn was not a daughter. She was not a sister. She was an entity. And S.K. Vaughn did not want to build houses. That was my father's game, building monuments to his own ego. No, I had learned from him. I had learned from Jamal. I saw their weakness. I saw the rot that arrogance and incompetence created. And I realized they were not unique. The world was full of Marcuses. The world was full of Jamals, sons and daughters running their families' legacies into the ground while they postured and partied. So S.K. Vaughn found her niche. I did not build things, I bought them. Or rather, I bought their mistakes. I bought their debt. I bought the bad loans, the defaulted mortgages, the broken contracts. I bought them for pennies on the dollar from banks that were desperate to get the rot off their books. My first acquisition was a small logistics company in Ohio, run into the ground by a son who was more interested in his golf game than his balance sheets. I went in. I found the value. I cut out the cancer. I restructured the debt. And I sold it 6 months later for a 2,000% profit. I did it again, and again, and again. I was not just an investor. I was a surgeon. I was the person they called when the family disease, the King disease, had become terminal. And I built my firm. I did not name it Vaughn. That was my private anchor. I named it Everest Holdings. Why? Because my father had always told me there were mountains I was not allowed to climb because I was a woman, because I was his daughter, because I was not his son. He told me to stay at the bottom to know my place. So I built my own mountain, an empire made of the broken pieces of men just like him. Everest was a reminder of the impossible solitary climb I was on. It was a climb I had to make alone in silence, with no one watching, no one cheering, and no one to catch me if I fell. For 10 years I climbed, while they were here in Atlanta drinking champagne and laughing about the Oakwood embarrassment. I was in boardrooms in New York, London, and Tokyo. While they were draining the King development accounts, I was building a fortress. And today on this Thanksgiving, after 10 long, cold, silent years, I finally reached the summit. And I am not here to enjoy the view. I am here to plant my flag. My words, companies just like yours, landed in the center of the room, and for a moment there was absolute perfect silence. I watched the impact. I saw Chad, the fast-talking arrogant brother-in-law, take an involuntary step back, his face pale and clammy. He finally understood he was in a game he did not know the rules to. I saw Keisha, her brow furrowed in genuine painful confusion. She was still trying to process CEO. She had not even begun to understand the implication of dying. And I saw my father Marcus, a great fallen statue, his eyes locked on my phone, his entire body rigid. They were all silent. All of them. Except one. Enough. The voice was Jamal's. It was not a shout of fear. It was a roar of frustration. He slammed his hand flat on the table, making the remaining glasses rattle. I have had enough of this, enough. He stormed toward my end of the table, his face red and puffy. I am sick of your little cryptic New York games, dying companies, restructuring, investors. He spat the words out like they were sour. Who do you think you are? We get it, he yelled, his voice cracking. You are smart. You are not a failure. You are a big, scary CEO. Congratulations. You won the family argument. You proved Dad wrong. Are you happy now? He leaned over the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood. I did not lean back. I just held his gaze, which was watery with rage, and I realized confusion. I do not care about any of that, he growled, his voice dropping. I do not care about your specialty. I do not care about Michael on the phone. I care about one thing. He straightened up, his confidence returning, puffing himself up for the family. The deal. Dad is selling. You are buying. The number is $86 million. That is the only part that matters. The rest is just noise. Keisha's head snapped up, her hope instantly rekindled by his stubborn confidence. He is right, she chimed in, her voice shrill. 86 million. That was the deal. Dad said we get the money. Jamal pointed his thick finger directly at my face. So stop it. Stop with the philosophy, stop with the smug little smile, and stop trying to scare everyone. It is Thanksgiving. Just answer the simple question. He paused, doing the math in his head, his face a mask of pure entitled greed. And when does Keisha get our money? When do we get our $43 million each? There it was. The bottomless, breathtaking arrogance. He had heard everything I said. He had understood nothing. He was still my father's golden boy, his hand out waiting for his allowance. I let the silence stretch. I let his question, his 43 million, hang in the air like a bad smell. I looked at Keisha, who was nodding eagerly, her eyes bright with imagined riches. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at me demanding. I did not smile. My face was flat, cold. "Oh, Jamal," I said. My voice was very, very quiet, forcing them all to lean in. "The money," I said, shaking my head just once, a tiny slow motion. "The $86 million. I let out a small, quiet breath, almost a sigh. "That," I said, "that is the most interesting part of all." I let my words, "that is the most interesting part of all," hang in the room for a full 10 seconds. I watched the two of them. Jamal, my brother, stood there, his chest puffed out, his face red with impatience. He was still the golden boy, still the crown prince demanding his inheritance. He had heard CEO, but his brain had immediately translated it to banker. Beside him, Keisha was literally vibrating. Her eyes, wide and hungry, darted between me and Jamal. The broken glass at her feet was already forgotten. She was calculating. 86 million, her share. 43 million, the house in Aspen, the new G-Wagon, the boat. She was already spending it. They were not listening to me. They were not seeing me. They were just seeing a vault that had unexpectedly but conveniently opened. I turned away from their grasping, needy faces. I looked back down at the sleek black phone on the table. Michael Harrison was still there, his face a perfect mask of professional patience. He was waiting. He knew his role. He knew the script. I had, after all, written it for him. "Michael," I said. My voice was suddenly crisp. It was the voice I used in the boardroom, the voice that cut through nonsense. "Are you still with us?" Michael's image on the screen nodded instantly. "Yes, Madam CEO. I am right here, standing by." Madam CEO. I heard Keisha take in a sharp breath. She was not used to hearing that title, and she especially was not used to hearing it directed at me. "Good," I continued, my voice cold. "Michael, I need you to clarify something for my family. They seem to be under a slight misapprehension, a slight misunderstanding about the terms of this acquisition." I saw my father Marcus out of the corner of my eye. He gripped the carved arms of his chair. His knuckles were bone white. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the tablecloth. He knew. In that moment, he knew the trap was real. "My brother and sister," I said, gesturing vaguely to Jamal and Keisha, "are operating under the number my father provided to them." I turned my gaze to my father. He refused to look up. $86 million. Jamal, hearing the number, nodded emphatically. "That is right," he barked, his confidence surging. 86 million. Now let's just get to it." "Yes," Keisha chimed in, her voice shrill. 86, that was the deal. I looked back at the phone. "Michael," I said, "I am looking at the final due diligence report, the executive summary, specifically the section on total liabilities versus assets." Michael on the screen nodded. "I have it right here, Madam CEO." "Excellent," I said. "My father, Marcus King, has just told the family he is selling this company for $86 million. I paused. "Please, Michael, I need you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I cannot seem to find that number anywhere in our deal memos. Can you confirm the actual audited valuation of King Development? Not the fantasy, Michael, the facts." There was a perfect professional silence. Michael looked down for a moment as if consulting a file, though I knew he had memorized this part. He looked back up at the camera. Madam CEO? He began, his voice flat, emotionless, and absolutely brutal. The number $86 million is not relevant to this transaction. It does not appear in any of our analysis. Jamal's red, triumphant face began to cloud with confusion. What? What is this? What is he talking about? Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice sharp, cutting off my brother. Just the final audited number, if you please. What is the net worth of King Development? Michael took a steadying breath. As of our final audit, which closed last Thursday, he said, his voice projecting clearly from the phone speaker, King Development has been operating at a net loss for the last 62 months. I watched my father's eyes close. He knew what was coming next. Michael continued, the company has multiple outstanding defaulted and accelerated loans, all of which, as you know, Everest Holdings has acquired from the primary lenders. The number, Michael, I pressed, twisting the knife. Understood, Michael said. The total outstanding secured and unsecured debt liability of King Development is $92,744,000. He paused, letting the number sink in. The company's liquid assets are less than $2 million. The hard assets are fully leveraged. King Development has a negative equity position of over $41 million. He delivered the final killing blow. The company is Madam CEO and has been for at least 5 years, functionally insolvent. The silence in the room was not silence. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of all the air, all the hope, all the greedy, stupid arrogance being sucked out of existence. I did not look at Michael. I looked at Jamal. His face was frozen. His mouth was hanging half open. The color was draining from his skin, leaving it a sick, pasty gray. He looked like a man who had been punched in the stomach hard. Beside him, Keisha just stood there. Her head was tilted, as if she was listening to a foreign language she could not quite understand. 92 million debt insolvent. These words were not in her vocabulary. She just blinked, her mind a perfect empty blank. And then, at the exact same moment, as if a single string had been pulled, they both turned. Not to me, but to my father. What? Keisha's voice was a tiny, high-pitched, desperate squeak. What? Jamal's voice was not a question. It was a roar, a sound of pure animal rage and disbelief. What the hell is he talking about? The air was vibrating with the force of Jamal's roar. He looked like a bull ready to charge, his massive frame trembling with pure, unadulterated fury. But his rage was not aimed at me. It was aimed entirely at my father. 92 million in debt insolvency, Jamal bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. Dad, what the hell is this? You told us. You swore 86 million. You told us we were set. You told us we were rich. He gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. All the money I put in, all the long hours, this is what you gave me, a $92 million loss. You lied to me. Keisha's reaction was entirely different. She did not roar. She started to cry. Not the fake celebratory tears from before. These were sharp, panicked sobs. Her face was a mess of running mascara and shock. She rushed toward my father, stumbling over the broken glass on the floor, ignoring the red wine stain on her dress. Dad, tell him he's lying, she shrieked, clutching his shoulder. Tell him that man is a liar. You said we could get the house in the Hamptons. You said we would be set for life. I quit my job. I just bought a new car. You promise. She shook him desperately, trying to force the powerful, controlling man back into existence. We are not poor. We cannot be poor. Say it, Dad. My father, Marcus King, was a portrait of defeat. He was slumped in his chair, his massive shoulders rounded, his usual granite mask fractured. He looked utterly diminished. He could not bring himself to look at Jamal, who was still raging. He could not look at Keisha, who was clinging to him and sobbing hysterically. He only looked at me. His eyes, full of terror and profound defeat, met mine across the long, silent table. He searched my face one last time, looking for a shred of mercy, a hint of the daughter he remembered. His voice, when it finally came, was thin and reedy, completely lacking its usual booming authority. It was the voice of a broken old man. "Simone," he whispered. He did not ask a question. He did not plead. He simply stated the truth, the one thing he could not deny anymore. "You knew." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "You knew it was this bad. You knew we were insolvent. You knew all along." My father's whisper hung in the air. "You knew all along?" Keisha's sobbing intensified. Jamal's furious breathing was the loudest sound in the room. They were still clinging to the idea that this was a disaster that had simply happened to them, that I had just magically appeared to witness their bad luck. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me everything I knew about power and betrayal, and I finally gave him my answer. "Knew," I said, my voice barely above a conversational level, yet it cut through the noise of their fear and their greed. I shook my head slowly. "No, Dad. You have it completely wrong." My voice became sharper, clearer. "I did not know it was this bad. I made sure it got this bad." The room went completely silent again. Keisha's sobs stopped instantly. Jamal's head snapped up, his eyes widening in comprehension. Chad, who had been leaning against the wall, stood ramrod straight. I looked at my father, delivering the final, crushing truth. "You see, Dad, Michael was not just my vice president. He was my scout. He was my canary in the coal mine." I leaned in, resting my arms on the table. 18 months ago, I started seeing the signs. The public lawsuits were bad enough, but the SEC filings, the delayed payments, the hemorrhaging cash flow. I knew King Development was terminal, but I also knew a terminal company needs an exit. "Your exit," I continued, "was supposed to be a public, humiliating bankruptcy. King Development, the legacy of the great Marcus King, dissolving in a court of law. The headlines would have been brutal, your reputation would have been destroyed, and Jamal and Keisha would have been forced to sell this house to cover the bank's losses." I gestured to Michael on the phone screen, still patiently waiting. "But Michael and we gave you another option. We gave you a graceful exit. We gave you Everest Holdings." I looked at Jamal, who was slowly backing away, his face pale. "You did not sell the company to me, Jamal. You did not sell the company at all. You were begging me to take it off your hands." I let the full weight of that statement sink in. I was not the buyer. I was the savior. The only difference was that my salvation came with a price tag they could never repay. "For the last 18 months, I continued, Everest Holdings has systematically spent millions of dollars acquiring every single piece of that $92 million debt. We bought your mortgages, your construction loans, your corporate bonds. We bought the debt for 10 cents on the dollar, yes, because we are shrewd investors, but we bought it all, every last cent. You did not sell King Development to me for $86 million? I looked at my father, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You signed the papers to transfer ownership to me in exchange for one thing, Everest Holdings agreeing to absorb and wipe out the $92 million debt you had accumulated." I paused. The air was thick with their absolute defeat. "The $86 million figure," I said, looking from my father to Jamal, and finally to Keisha, whose eyes were now streaming with fear. "That number was never the selling price. That number was simply the estimated total sum that you, Dad, and Jamal had managed to illegally siphon out of the company over the last 10 years to fund your extravagant lifestyles." I leaned back, resting my case. "The transaction you signed was not a sale. It was an intervention. It was a way to save your family name from public ruin. And that number, that glorious 86 million you were so excited about, that is the amount of money you need to prepare to explain to the IRS and the Securities Commission. Not the amount of money you are receiving. The truth of the debt, the $92 million weight hung over the table. My father was silent, defeated. Keisha was staring at the red wine stain as if she could rewind time. Chad, the opportunist, was already positioning himself by the door, calculating his escape. They were all broken. All of them except Jamal. He was a cornered animal. And like a cornered animal, his last defense was rage and denial. No! Jamal roared. He slammed his fist down again, this time hard enough to make the serving dishes jump. The noise was terrifying. He was breathing hard, his eyes darting around the room, desperately seeking a lifeline, a different story, any story but the one I had just told. And he found it where he always did. The old worn-out lie. The one that had worked for 10 years. "It's you!" he screamed, his voice thick with a rage so primal it actually shook. "It's all your fault, Simone. All of it." He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. "You want to talk about siphoning money? You want to talk about debt?" He took a large, ragged breath. "The company was fine before you. It was stable, but you had to come in with your crazy, pointless Oakwood project. That is where the hole started." He walked around the table, not coming toward me, but circling, projecting his narrative to the remaining relatives watching in stunned silence. $20 million, he yelled, addressing the room. $20 million lost on her naive little pet project. That is the day we went into the red. That is the day the banks started circling. She is the one. She is the one who weakened the company. She started the rot. He stopped, standing directly behind my father, using Marcus's slumped, defeated form as a visual shield. He looked at me, his eyes burning with frantic, desperate conviction. He had to make this true. For him to survive, I had to be the villain. "You ran away," he hissed, his voice dropping slightly now, aiming for sincerity. "You ran away and left us to fix your mess. You are the cause of the debt. You are the cancer that almost killed King Development. And now you come back here 10 years later to play the hero. To call us thieves. You are the real thief. You stole our future a decade ago. You did this to us." He leaned over the table, his face twisted with hatred, projecting all his own sins onto me one final time. "All of this, Simone, every single damn bit of it, is because of you." Jamal stood there breathing heavily, convinced he had just won the argument. He had successfully rewritten history one last time, pinning all $92 million of debt on my failed $20 million project from a decade ago. He looked smug, waiting for my inevitable tearful defeat. I simply looked at him. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. "You know what, Jamal?" I said, my voice cutting through his fading rage, sharp and precise. "You are absolutely right." He blinked, confused by my concession. "Let us talk about Oakwood," I stated. "Let us talk about the truth of the last 10 years. Let us talk about who the real thief is and who the real cancer was." I reached for the phone. Michael Harrison's face was still patiently waiting on the screen. "Michael," I commanded, "I need you to execute the final distribution." "Understood, Madam CEO." Michael's voice came through the speaker. "The King family correspondence file is being distributed now." I watched, cold satisfaction filling me, as 4 separate phones on the dining table, my father's, Jamal's, Keisha's, and even Chad's, all made the same distinct jarring ping sound of an incoming email attachment. Their heads snapped down simultaneously, checking their devices. I watched them scroll. "What is this?" Keisha muttered, squinting at her screen. "It is just old emails." "They are not just old emails, Keisha," I explained, my voice carrying the weight of 10 years of silence. "They are the receipts. They are the proof." I looked directly at Jamal. The first attachment, Jamal, is dated June 12th, 10 years ago. It is an internal memo I wrote to you and Dad. It is a detailed 3-page engineering analysis, not naive fantasy, Dad, that unequivocally warned you both that the structural foam and substandard steel you insisted on using for the Oakwood Foundation would compromise the entire project's integrity. My father's face, already ashen, was turning green as he scrolled through his phone. He slammed his device down on the table, the sound loud and violent. He could not read any further. I ignored him. The second attachment, I continued, is your response, Dad, dated June 13th. You told me I was meddling where a woman did not belong and ordered me to keep my mouth shut and know my position. That is why I left Jamal. Not because I was a failure, but because my father chose incompetence over integrity. Jamal was scrolling frantically through his own phone, his face twisted in disbelief. No. No, this is faked. This is doctored. You cannot do this. The third attachment, I said, my voice hardening to steel, is the best one. It is the contract that was signed 1 week later. The contract that shifted the construction to a shell corporation that no one in this room had ever heard of. A company that, according to Michael's forensic audit, exists only on paper and is solely owned by a holding entity in the Cayman Islands. I leaned in. You want to talk about theft, Jamal? That shell corporation was used to skim $5 million in quality material funding out of the Oakwood budget and straight into a private account. $5 million. That is not a failure, Jamal. That is a felony. That is embezzlement. I looked him straight in the eyes, my voice a brutal whisper. You did not lose $20 million because of my design. You lost $20 million trying to steal 5. And the only reason you did not end up in handcuffs that day is because Dad, the great Marcus King, spent the next 18 months pulling strings and cashing favors to cover your criminal backside. I looked at the entire family, sweeping my gaze from the father to the children. I did not weaken King development. I stated the ultimate truth finally spoken. I tried to save it. I warned you. I documented it. I abandoned my entire life and career here to avoid being an accessory to your crimes. The debt, the bankruptcy, the failure to secure $86 million, the collapse of this entire legacy, was not my fault. It was the direct result of the two people who have been so quick to call me a thief and a failure. I looked at Jamal, who had dropped his phone and covered his mouth with his hands. And you... I looked at my father, who was staring blankly at the wall. The two of you, I concluded, my voice ringing with finality, are the ones who killed King Development. Jamal had dropped his phone. It lay face up on the mahogany table, displaying the incriminating contract signed with the shell company. He stared at it, then at me, then back at the phone. The shock was too great for anger. It was a complete final short circuit. Keisha was still crying, though now it was a low, desperate sound. Her grief finally focused on the loss of money, not the loss of a legacy she never cared about. The only person not focused on the screens was my father. Marcus King, the great patriarch, the man who had controlled every dollar and every decision in this family for 4 decades, was visibly collapsing. He slowly slid down in his chair, his posture utterly broken, his expensive suit now looking like a discarded rag. His face was buried in his hands. The power was gone. The facade had cracked. He was just an old man who had lost everything, not in a great battle, but in a series of small, stupid decisions, fueled by a blind loyalty to his worthless son. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were wet and red. He looked past the table, past the food, past the screens, straight at me. The pride, the arrogance, the judgment, it was all gone. All that remained was a profound, helpless plea. "Simone," he whispered. His voice was raw, thin, and brittle. It was the sound of rock grinding into dust. "Please." He tried to lean forward, grasping for my hand, but I instinctively pulled back just a fraction of an inch, enough to stop him. "Please, my girl," he begged. This is enough. You have won. You have proven your point. You have proven you are smarter than us all. You have humiliated us. Please." His eyes darted around the room, settling on the heavy carved furniture and the portraits of our ancestors lining the walls. "This is the family's name," he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. "It is my father's legacy. It is his house. You cannot just expose all of us. You cannot let them, the banks, the papers, the SEC. You cannot let them dissolve what grandfather built. It is all we have left. Simone, please. It is the family legacy. He looked at me with what he clearly thought was his most powerful card, the appeal to blood, to history, to my sense of duty. I looked back at him. My face remained cold. Legacy. I repeated the word, tasting it on my tongue. It felt bitter. You talked to me about legacy. I glanced at Jamal, who still sat frozen, unable to look up. This company, this house, this name, this family. I said, my voice quiet but devastating. It was never just yours, Dad. This was Mama's legacy too. It was her brilliant mind that helped Grandfather incorporate. It was her family's land this house sits on. I looked at him and I delivered the final emotional crushing blow. And you, Dad, you did not protect her legacy. You let your incompetence, you let your ego, and you let your blind, pathetic love for him. I nodded toward Jamal. Destroy everything she worked for. You protected a criminal, and you threw away the future of your wife's entire bloodline. My gaze hardened. I am not destroying the legacy, Dad. I am here to reclaim it. My father's plea, it is the family legacy, hung heavy in the air. But I had moved past emotion. I had moved past forgiveness. I had reached the stage of consequence. I looked away from my defeated father, my gaze now sweeping over Jamal and Keisha. They were still standing side by side, united not by love, but by the shared, terrifying realization that they were bankrupt. Jamal was leaning heavily on the table, his eyes vacant. Keisha was staring at the floor, a single broken sob escaping her lips now and then. I waited for their attention. When I had it, I delivered the final professional assessment. The time for talking about legacies is over. I said, my voice sharp and clear, the perfect voice of a CEO cleaning house. Now we talk about operations. Effective immediately, there are some necessary changes at King Development. I looked straight at my brother Jamal. Jamal, you are no longer the chief operating officer. In fact, you are no longer an employee. Jamal's head snapped up. What, Simone, you can't. I'm your brother. I run the company. You ran the company into $92 million of debt, Jamal. I corrected him calmly. I can and I will. As the legal owner of Everest Holdings, which now owns all assets and liabilities of King Development, I am formally terminating your employment. I then turned to my sister Keisha, whose face was already twisting into a fresh wave of panic. Keisha, your position as Director of Marketing is also terminated. You are both to clear out your desks and return all company property to Michael's team by the end of the day tomorrow. Keisha's wails became immediate and high-pitched. She rushed forward, grabbing my arm, but I stood firm, forcing her to let go. No, Simone, you can't fire us. Where will we go? What will we do? She screamed. The salary, the benefits, the company credit card. Her mind jumped to the most immediate tangible loss. And the Rivian. We just bought the Rivian. That was a company lease. What about the new house? The down payment was supposed to clear this week. I shook my head slowly, answering her panicked questions one by one. The company credit card was frozen an hour ago. Michael has already notified the leasing agency regarding the Rivian. They will be collecting it in the morning. And as for the house, I paused, letting the silence maximize the blow. Your down payment bounced this morning because your accounts, which were heavily dependent on unauthorized transfers from King Development, are now completely empty. I looked at my brother and sister, two adults suddenly stripped down to nothing. The office you were coming back to tomorrow morning is now mine, I said. The keys, the company bank accounts, the client list, it is all under my control. You are officially locked out. I leaned in, meeting their terrified, desperate gaze. Welcome to the real world, Jamal. Welcome to the real world, Keisha. It is a place where every dollar is earned, not given, and it is where you both now belong. The dining room was silent once more, save for Keisha's soft, broken whimpering. Jamal was staring at the floor, processing the reality of unemployment and crippling debt. The King family empire had crumbled in the space of one Thanksgiving announcement. But one person still had a protest left in him. Chad, my brother-in-law, the man who had ridden their coattails for years, finally found his voice high-pitched and indignant. He stepped away from the wall and approached the table, his face a mess of betrayal and fear. He pointed a trembling finger not at me, but at the broken figure of his father-in-law. "Marcus," he cried, addressing my father, "you cannot let her do this. This is insane, Simone. You cannot do this to family." He looked at me, his eyes full of desperate appeal. "We are family. You can't just throw out your own blood, your sister, your brother, your father. This is not how family works." I turned my full attention to Chad, the man who had winked at me just an hour earlier. I let his words about family hang in the air, allowing the hypocrisy to taint the atmosphere. "Family," I repeated the word, tasting like ash. "You want to talk about family, Chad? You want to talk about what is owed to blood?" I looked past him to my father, who was still slumped watching me with a vacant, miserable expression. "You know what, Chad?" I said, my voice rising slightly, taking command of the room one final time. My father was right about one thing tonight. The entire room, Marcus, Jamal, Keisha, and the remaining stunned relatives, looked at me wondering what possible concession I could be making. I looked at my father and I repeated his words, but with a new devastating meaning. He said that today I get nothing. I paused. And you know what? He was absolutely correct. I shook my head slowly, my eyes cold and unflinching. Today I walked in here, and I received absolutely nothing. I received no father's pride. I received no brother's protection. I received no sister's love. I received no warmth. I received nothing but mockery, humiliation, and a final public act of rejection. I looked from my defeated father to my weeping sister and finally to my raging brother. I have already accepted my lot. I stated the finality of the statement ringing true. I accept the nothing you gave me. I do not want your pity, your approval, or your affection. That chapter of my life is permanently closed. I looked back at Chad, and my voice became a statement of justice, not revenge. "And you," I asked them all, Jamal, Keisha, Dad, and Chad, "you were so happy, so celebratory, so eager for me to walk away with nothing." I gave them a final chilling smile. "And now you have received exactly what you deserve for your decade of malice, your lies, your theft, and your boundless greed." My voice dropped to a low, powerful whisper. "You also get nothing." The room was utterly defeated. The heavy atmosphere of shame, fear, and loss was suffocating the remnants of the King family. My final words, "You also get nothing," had been the definitive closing statement, the gavel hitting the wood. I watched them one last time, analyzing the final tableau of their collapse. They were no longer the powerful, arrogant family I had encountered just hours before. They were just people broken by the truth. Keisha was the most pathetic figure. She was no longer screaming, just slumped in a chair, shaking with high-pitched, desperate sobs. Her makeup was ruined. Her perfect red dress was stained with the dark red wine of her own despair, and she was clutching her empty hands to her chest. She cried for the loss of the money, for the loss of her illusion, for the terrifying prospect of having to live without a safety net she never realized was already gone. Jamal was silent, completely disturbingly silent. He had picked his phone up off the table and he was staring unmoving at the email attachment, the contract, the proof of his embezzlement from 10 years prior. His large frame seemed to have shrunk, the red flush of rage replaced by a sickly gray pallor. The gold boy had finally seen the cold, hard receipts of his crimes. The realization of the true financial and potentially legal danger he was in had silenced the bully completely. Chad, the smooth opportunist, was scrambling. He knelt awkwardly beside Keisha, attempting to pat her shoulder, murmuring hollow, desperate phrases like, "It's going to be okay, honey." But his eyes betrayed him. They flickered constantly, darting from my face to the documents on the table, calculating the cost of his loyalty. He was trapped in the collapse, realizing he had backed the wrong horse, and that the debt on Keisha's new car was now his problem. He was an outsider who thought he was a player, and he looked sick with the knowledge that he was just collateral damage. And my father, Marcus, the man who had once stood tall as a monarch, was utterly spent. He did not cry. He did not rage. He just stared into the middle distance, his eyes glazed over and lifeless. In the span of an hour, the pressure, the lie, and the truth had added 20 years to his life. He was a shell of the powerful CEO who had tapped his glass just moments ago. He had lost his legacy, his children's loyalty, and his empire, all in the name of protecting a lie. He was simply waiting for the inevitable consequences of his own disastrous choices to catch up. They were all waiting. The game had ended. My father, Marcus, lifted his head slowly from his hands. His eyes, lifeless moments before, now focused entirely on me. All the anger, the pride, the arrogance was burned away, leaving only ash and confusion. He saw the cold, efficient CEO I had become, but he still searched for the daughter he had exiled. His voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the booming authority it usually possessed. It was thin, trembling, and utterly broken. "Why?" he breathed out. "Why did you do this, Simone?" He swallowed hard, his voice laced with the final vestiges of his pain and bewilderment. He was not asking for a business explanation. He was asking for a reason for the betrayal, a justification for the destruction of his family. "Why go through all of this trouble?" he pleaded. "Why spend all this money, all this time, all this effort, just to ruin us? Why not just let the banks take it? Why take it over just to expose us all? Why Simone? Why this?" He gestured vaguely at the wreckage. Jamal's silence, Keisha's sobs, the entire ruined Thanksgiving dinner. He was appealing to the blood tie one last time, begging for an answer that would make sense of my decade-long siege. "We are your family. I am your father," he whispered, searching my eyes for pity. "Why did you need to do this to me?" I looked at him. I did not soften my gaze. The question was heartbreaking, but it was also profoundly narcissistic. He was still the victim in his own mind. He still did not understand the true lesson he had taught me. I picked up my wineglass, which was still half full, and looked at the dark liquid reflecting the lights of his shattered dining room. "You taught me how to do this, Dad," I said, my voice clear and precise, cutting through the heavy air. I looked directly at him. "You taught me the most important lesson I ever learned about business and about family. 10 years ago, when I tried to tell you the truth about Oakwood, when I gave you the facts and the figures, you told me to be quiet. You told me my loyalty meant nothing. You protected a liar and a thief." I nodded toward Jamal. "And you threw your own daughter out of your house. That was your lesson, Dad." I raised the glass, not in a toast, but in a solemn acknowledgement of the painful truth. "You taught me that in this family and in this world you created, the only currency that matters is power, and the only person you can ever truly trust is yourself." "I learned that lesson very well, Dad." I concluded the ultimate cold affirmation. "I learned it perfectly." I stood silent, letting the gravity of my final words settle over my father. He just looked at me, a profound emptiness in his gaze. He had no more arguments. He had no more pleas. He was just a defeated man staring at the consequence of his own lessons. The silence that followed was heavy with finality. The last course of the Thanksgiving dinner had been served, digested, and utterly ruined. The performance was over. The sentencing was complete. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down and picked up my napkin from the table. It was heavy linen embroidered with the King family crest. I folded it once smoothly and placed it neatly back down beside my plate. It was a small act of composure in a room filled with chaos, a silent signal that my business here was concluded. I pushed my chair back from the table. The scrape of the mahogany legs on the hardwood floor was loud, a sharp, definitive noise. I did not look at Keisha's sobbing face. I did not look at Jamal's terrified slump. I looked only at the exit. You can't go home again. That old saying had echoed in my mind for 10 years. But standing here looking at the wreckage of the King dynasty, I knew it wasn't true. I had come home, and I had found exactly what I needed to find. I hadn't returned to this mansion looking for closure. I hadn't come for apologies or forgiveness or reconciliation. That girl died the day I left. That girl wanted to heal. The woman who returned wanted justice. I did not come back here to ask them to acknowledge my worth. I returned to take back what was rightfully mine. Not the money I had built far more than $86 million on my own, but the dignity, the truth, the legacy of my mother that my father had let rot. They thought I was coming back to beg for a share of a failing company. They thought I would be grateful for scraps. They were so busy congratulating themselves they never saw me coming. They never saw the 10 years I spent meticulously gathering their debts, their mistakes, and their betrayals, packaging it all neatly and serving it back to them on a silver platter. I turned away from the dining table, leaving the shattered pieces of their life. The broken glass, the spilled wine, the ruined greed behind me. I walked through the grand foyer, past the silent, stunned faces of the few remaining relatives and servants. I felt no triumph, only a clean, cold sense of quiet, final completion. I had executed my plan. I had closed the chapter. I had come home. And I had taken everything. I moved quickly, efficiently through the cold marble foyer, paying no attention to the stunned silence I left in my wake. My business with the kings was done. It was time to return to my own empire. I pulled open the massive front door of the mansion. The cool Atlanta night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. I stepped out onto the portico, and there it was. My beat-up 10-year-old Lexus sedan was still sitting exactly where I had left it, an intentional final disguise. It was a visual reminder to the family of the failure they thought I was. But just behind it, pulled up discreetly near the gate, was the reality. A sleek obsidian black Maybach S-Class, its chrome trim gleaming under the mansion's floodlights. The car was a silent, opulent statement of power. It did not belong on this property, not in their worldview. It was too polished, too serious, too New York. The rear door was already being held open. Standing beside it was Michael Harrison. He had disconnected the video call moments after delivering the final debt figures, but he had obviously been waiting nearby, monitoring the situation. He was no longer the face on the screen. He was flesh and blood, my loyal 50-year-old white male vice president, a quiet symbol of my true authority. He met me at the foot of the steps, his face professional and unreadable. He did not ask what happened inside. He did not need to. He simply confirmed the mission was a success. "Madam CEO," Michael said, his voice low and respectful, "is everything satisfactory?" I paused at the door of the Maybach. I took one last long look back at the King Mansion. It was dark now. The lights that had blazed with arrogance were dim, sullen. It was no longer a home. It was an asset I now owned. I saw my father's silhouette standing motionless in the front windows, staring out. I felt a final clean severance. I turned away from him forever. "It is settled, Michael." I confirmed, my voice a breath of cold resolve. "The debt has been absorbed. The ownership transfer is complete. King Development is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Everest Holdings." I slid into the plush leather interior of the car. Michael closed the door softly. He did not get in the front seat. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. I leaned back, resting my head against the soft headrest. The chaos was behind me. The future, the real work, lay ahead. "And now," I said, looking out at the darkness, "now we start the actual work, Michael. It is time to stop playing games with broken men. It is time to build something real. We are going to restructure King Development, sell off the toxic assets, and use the capital to fund our flagship project." I looked forward into the driving night toward the city. "We are going back to Oakwood. We are going to make it right. We are going to build the community I always intended to build." I gave Michael the final quiet order. Let's go, Michael. Drive. The engine purred to life. The Maybach pulled away from the curb and glided silently down the driveway, leaving the ruined King legacy behind. I was gone, disappearing into the city night, ready to start the next chapter of my own unbreakable empire. After witnessing the complete downfall of the King family, the most profound lesson is about the true nature of power and legacy. They believed power was inherited and loud. Simone proved it is built in silence and rooted in competence. She did not seek revenge. She sought justice and control. The lesson is simple. Never allow someone else's low opinion of you to define your strategy. While they were focused on their temporary pride and public image, Simone was mastering the complex rules of finance and collecting the actual leverage, the debt. True wealth is measured not by assets displayed, but by liabilities controlled. Ready to build your own Everest hit-like and share the one truth your family underestimated about you.